is Momchil. Really excited to be part of this, and especially excited to be hosting this with Bogomil. I've known Bogomil pretty much since the very beginning of Leanplum. Yeah, we're both Bulgarian, but we didn't actually meet in Bulgaria. We met in San Francisco, and it was just a completely random chance. I was fundraising, and I met one of our investors, and he ended up introducing me to Bogomil through Bulgaria. So that was a roundabout way, but he was one of our very first angel investors. And not only that, but he's actually stayed and been a friend of Leanplum for many, many years. He was on the board. He's been advising us. He even stepped in for a few months to help us with some product marketing and and help with positioning and such, which is his really strong area of expertise. So really thankful for him over the years, and excited to have him.
Awesome. Likewise. So maybe a good place to start is for you to tell us a little bit about Leanplum, the company that you co-founded and still have a leadership role in. So kind of on the face of it, the company focuses on providing a solution for multi-channel customer engagement. And maybe can you help us decipher it? Like, what does this mouthful of terms actually mean?
Yeah. So I mean, essentially, we work with primarily with companies where what I like to call is app businesses, or where the app is really their business, their main business. So if you think of like a meditation app, pretty much the app is their business. But if you look at, say, Macy's, the retail store is their business, and the app is probably just buried somewhere in the backyard, and it's really not that important. So really, we focus on those apps where the app is the business of the company, and we provide customer engagement. So what does that mean? It means communication tools, especially to allow more personalized, more relevant communication for a variety of different channels. So push notifications, email, there could be in-app messages, it could be SMS, it could be other things. And we're also the only provider on the market that is also able to bridge that with the ability to optimize and personalize the in-app experience. And a lot of times when you're personalizing a journey, a customer journey, you want to be able to personalize every touch point. The email that goes out, the push notification with a coupon, but also you land in the app, you want to personalize that as well. So bringing it all together comes in as a customer engagement platform. So long story short, that's what we do.
Awesome. Now, if somebody looks at your bio before Leanplum, quite honestly, nothing in your journey before Leanplum points to, oh, I'm going to found a multi-channel customer engagement company. Like, you grew up in Bulgaria, you studied CS in the US, you're a grad student at CMU, then you took an engineering job at Google, and then founder of multi-channel customer engagement company. How did that happen? And how did this idea come from? Just tell us about the origin story of the company.
Yeah, it's a fair question. How does an engineer start a marketing company? So I can definitely speak to that, but it's a very interesting, because to be honest, it's equal part of starting the company in marketing, but it's also equal part of being a founder of a company. Because I remember pretty much since the very beginning, as far as I can remember, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And it's an interesting kind of setup, because Bulgaria, for those of you who don't know, in the 80s, it was still a communist country, right? So there's basically zero entrepreneurship. You're not allowed to, the law says you're not allowed to start a company. And in the 90s, the opposite happened, where democracy came about. It was kind of like the Wild West. Everybody's trying different things. And I remember my uncle, he was very active, and he always called it, he had a private enterprise, and he was always telling me at dinners that being a private owner is the best thing in the world, right? So just make sure whatever you do in life, just become a private owner, right? So,
something.
Yes. And then it just stuck with me. And as you said, right, so I ended up coming to the US. I did a math and computer science degree, then worked at Google as a software engineer. But I very distinctly remember when I first came in the US for my undergrad, and I went to school at State University of New York for my undergrad, did a double major in math, computer science. I really wanted to find a path to be able to start a company. And I basically built this kind of long-term plan where first I need to get a job on campus, because I was, literally just fresh off the boat. So I need to figure out how to, stay on campus and in the university, pay for myself. Then then I was able to get that job. It was in the IT department. Then I was able to get an internship at a tech company in the local city of Rochester. Then I got a tech internship at Google. Then I got a job at Google, and I said, okay, well, once I get there, I'll learn all the things I need to learn, and I'll eventually start my own company. And I got into Google, and just this thing happened where you get really comfortable. You know, they have all this free food, and you get really, you know, excited about the products you're building. You know, just huge company. All your needs are met, right? And anything you want to do, you can do, right? And quite honestly, I kind of forgot about my end goal of starting a company, and that's probably why I ended up staying for so long at 5 years. And
so
I
that
remember,
5-point plan of like how to start a company got shoved somewhere in the bottom of some drawer, like at your desk at Google.
yeah, and yeah, so that was that. But I did get a CMU degree, and I actually signed up for CMU. I was doing it part-time. I did the Silicon Valley campus, and one of the classes I took there, I remember very distinctly. It was kind of, you know, it was a wake-up call for me because it was an entrepreneurship class. The professor was this guy called Scott Russell, and I don't think he teaches anymore, but he's retired, and I think he was even retired back then. But he was an early investor at Yahoo. He was kind of like a .com guy, and he had done really well for himself, and he was teaching entrepreneurship. And he said, look, this class is going to be, you join at the beginning of the class, you're going to build a product, and then I'm going to teach you how to pitch it, and we're going to end the class with a bunch of VCs. They're going to come in, real VCs. I had never met a VC in my life prior to that, by the way. It's kind of like one of those things where if you're working for a big company, you don't even interact at all with the startup environment. Like, you know, Silicon Valley is about startups, but if you're in the middle of a big company, none of this world exists. Like, at least for me, it didn't exist. Yeah. And so I remember this guy came in, he looked at all the pitches at the end of the class, and he liked mine the most. He actually gave me his card. And like, I literally couldn't sleep that night.
And just for entertainment value, what was the product that you built and you were pitching to this panel of VCs?
So it was a mobile app, and I called it Hot and Cold, where the idea was that there's going to be kind of like geocaching. There's going to be different things buried around the world, and you're going to have to find them by, but the system just tells you if you're close or not, right? So hot or cold, right? So as you get closer, it starts to beep, so you're finding the thing. I later on when I want to make myself feel good, I say that this was the early version of Pokemon Go, but
fair enough.
I didn't have the IP idea at all. But anyway, that was kind of the idea.
Came your tech workshop.
I think somebody's
somebody's not on mute.
Yeah. Yeah, so anyway, I got this class. It was really fun, and I got home with this business card. That was my trophy, and I was really proud of myself. And you know, I realized that I'm actually having a lot of fun when I'm doing this kind of stuff, and I was just happy, and I just wanted to try it and see how it would work. And so I think that was kind of my kick, you know, to go out and actually try and see if I can get to my last piece on my plan of starting a company.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And can you maybe just share with us, okay, so what was the journey? What are the series of steps from that aha moment of like, hey, you know, I had a mission here and I sort of deviated from the mission and I need to get back on track, between that and actually incorporating, like, you know, what happened? Like,
yeah, well, I will give credit to Google for one thing, because I remember we basically started just doing like weekends with my co-founder, and you know, we would just get together. I'd do a full-time job, and then on the weekend I would do another full-time job of just getting together, brainstorming ideas. And we had this master sheet of 20 ideas that we all were able to generate, and they were just crazy ideas. Like, you know, one of them was this, both of us played the piano, so we wanted to build an iPad app which shows you sheet music, and it turns the page for you as you're playing. So that was one of the ideas.
Good idea. Not a very big market, but
exactly. I don't think we realized the market concept at the time. And then a bunch of other, like, we wanted to build a community for people who train models in machine learning, and on, like just all varied like ideas. And one of the very first ideas actually that we came up with was this ability to do A/B testing in mobile apps. And to my knowledge, it wasn't possible at all. Like, mobile was still kind of in the early days, and I had built some of the A/B testing infrastructure at YouTube, so I knew how to build A/B testing tools really well. And as far as I could tell, I mean, it looked like it's not something that was out there. But that was literally one of our first ideas. And we said, well, that's not a good idea because it took me 3 months to build the A/B testing tools at Google. So I need a real company. Like, what am I going to do after the third month at Leanplum, right? And we kind of put that on the back burner. And eventually we kind of exhausted the list. And I read this quote from Paul Graham that said that, you can have a lot of ideas, but you also need to be the right person for the idea, meaning that you need to have done something that can give you an edge. And, because otherwise whoever has the edge is going to spin circles around you, right? And I, ended up with my co-founder, we basically went back to the original idea of this A/B testing thing and said, look, that's literally what we just did and we've been doing at Google. So let's just, in a different realm, right? It was more web, but let's just do that. And here we go. It's several, almost like a decade later, it's evolved. And clearly what you started with, which was this small little thing, turned into a much bigger thing. It turned into a much bigger market opportunity and so on and so forth. But that was kind of the inception idea. And then after that, we wanted to find validation that we're not just, fooling ourselves, because we obviously have good jobs, we have good equity in those jobs. So we wanted some external validation. So we ended up applying to a couple of different incubators, and we ended up getting into Techstars. So Techstars was kind of the spark for us to say, okay, well, if somebody is willing to bet $800,000, which was it was 25,000, I believe, the ticket for entrance, like the original check that you get to get in, then clearly something's, there's something there. And I remember there were 1,000 companies that applied to the incubator, and they only got 10, and we were the only company that ended up getting a spot offer to get into the accelerator. So I was pretty excited about that, and that's how it all started, right? So then, you get into the accelerator, and it just starts, into a lot of work, trying to get the initial product out, initial market, product market fit, and getting some funding later on and on and on and on, right?
And the rest is history, so to speak. Tell us about the unusual name of the company. Like, why? What does Leanplum mean? Like, how did you come up with it?
Yeah, Lean and Leanplum comes from the Lean Startup, because that was a book that I had just read, and I really liked the notion of A/B testing and being lean and being iterative, data-driven. And the plum, when I speak to the press nowadays, I always say, look, Silicon Valley was an orchard back in the day, so there are a lot of fruit companies that came out of it, like Apple and Leanplum. Hopefully, one of those days is going to be a really big company, and on, right? But may or may not have to do with the domain name that was available at the time. So I don't really talk about that.
Awesome. And so going back to these early days of the company, you and your co-founder, Andrew, like, you get together, you graduate from Techstars, get some funding, build a product, and then what? I think one of the most challenging parts of the early journey for every founder is, how do you put that early product in the hands of customers? Or in your case, like, what are the hardest challenges, like, in these very early days of the company?
So I don't know if there is a thing like this, but I kind of came up with my own law of the equilibrium of the business world, which states that basically no startup is allowed to enter or disrupt the equilibrium of the business world. And the way it happens is basically everything you do when you start a company is just super hard. Like, to get your first customer, it's impossible, because nobody wants to be their first customer, right? They all want to be coming in and getting references of all these other great customers you've got. And if you want to get funding, nobody wants to put in the first check, because they don't know if you're going to end up actually raising the round. And it just, all these examples of things where it just, first employee is another great one. Like, who wants to be the first employee when the founders get like 50% of the company each, and then the first employee gets like an order of magnitude less, right? And it's just not a good deal. And so it was just so hard to get the first employee in. But anyway, I think the way you get past all of these kind of challenges, I would say, is you just have to really hustle, and you have to, you just have to work really hard. I mean, I remember when we did Techstars, it was just a marathon. It wasn't a marathon. It was like a sprint for 90 days. I think my co-founder and I, we worked literally 16 hours a day, 90 days straight. It was a 90-day program. And on the 91st day, I took a day off, and it was the weirdest thing I'd done. It was just so weird. Like even seeing the daylight out and just not having to actually be at work, it was just so weird for me. But you know, we did that, and part of that was finding our first customer. And obviously nobody wants to be a first customer, but what we did is it's just a numbers game. You know, we went in and went to this conference. We were focusing on mobile gaming at the time for all of our early customers for A/B testing tools, right? And we went to this conference, gaming conference in Seattle, which is where we're based, and that's where the incubator was based. And we just started asking. We literally said we had a list of every attendee at the conference. It was a 3-day conference, and it was like 300 people, and we divided the list. And then Andrew and I literally, we said we're going to talk to everybody at this conference, and we're going to ask them what their pain points are, and we're going to go in and actually, you know, pitch them and see if they can be a customer. And you know, literally, it's like I'm not probably the most talkative person at a conference. Like I don't get to meet everybody.
Judging from today, it doesn't seem that you're not talkative.
I am talkative, but I'm not usually the person that goes and introduces themselves to everybody, right? And at that conference, literally on day 3, I was just walking down the hall, and everybody's like, "Hey, hi, Momchil, how's it going? Oh, I haven't seen you since a couple of days. Hey, how's it going?" Right? It was just I had met everybody, and you know, sure enough, I was at a lunch line, and the guy in front of me was a product manager, and you know, literally, I asked him, "Okay, what do you do?" He's San Francisco, Seattle based, and I just told him, "Look, are you interested in trying this out?" And he's like, "Sure, but you know what? I don't have any resources. So if you guys come to our office and integrate it for us, we'll just, you know, why not?" Right? And that's literally what it took for us to get our first customer. So I think it's just, again, a numbers game. And so the other thing that was really cool is
it's a numbers game, but also I think like one of the moral of the story here is like you need to put yourself out there, right? Like, you know, the customer is not going to come to you. You need to go to them, and you need to get over the discomfort of chatting up a lot of strangers and because, you know, for a lot of engineers especially, that is a super awkward moment, but that's what it takes. Like, you know, as a founder, you become the salesperson in chief of not only of your product, but of the entire company. And you just need to always be closing, right? Like ABC, like, you know, whatever you go, whatever lunch line you happen to be standing in, you're always selling the company.
And the other thing I would say, which was, again, really cool, is our original hypothesis was that we, as engineers, are building tools for ourselves. So our customers, the engineers, right? And we went and talked to all these engineers that work at gaming companies, and none of them wanted our tools. They're all like, you know, we're going to build it ourselves, right? I don't want to be speaking with you. Except when we spoke with the product managers, all of them were like, all these tools at our companies, they're all built by engineers for engineers. We really need to be empowered. We want to have our own tools, self-service tools. And we immediately found the product market fit through trial and error, because our original hypothesis was just wrong. And sure enough, we started reaching out to product managers. We got a lot of good feedback, and we got a lot more potential customers as a result, right? But I agreed. It's about just, you know, hustling and just getting your name out and then speaking with all, you know, prospects.
And then after the first customer, like, how did you go about the second and the third, you know, etc.? Was it like going to more conferences and, like, you know, dividing up the list, or like what happened after that?
We ended up, I mean, I remember we got our first paying customer, which is the only customer I've ever closed. I'm very proud of that. I still have a copy of the check, by the way. Yeah, I mean, it was basically just working our network, because when we found what our customer base looks like, okay, it's all the gaming companies out there and all the product managers at those gaming companies, then we basically went through a list of every gaming company out there that we know of, and we scoured our network, because we had Techstars behind us. And so there were literally dozens and dozens of advisors. And one of those advisors turned out to be essentially the early angel investor in a gaming company that was our first customer, and they're still a customer of ours, so I'm really proud of that. But that's kind of that was our first paying customer, but we got a lot of potential customers, you know. Once we got the first one, then we got a case study out of it, and it just turned the wheel, right? And that's essentially kind of breaking that first is really hard.
Got it. Speaking of things being hard, like the mythology of Silicon Valley is, very often talks about the successes, and it kind of makes you almost feel like a startup journey is like always up and to the right, like, and the truth is very, very different. There are ups and downs, and it's kind of more of a random walk, like going directionally up, but like day to day doesn't feel like, up and to the right. And in the life of every startup, there are many crucible moments that are literally like, life and death moments, that either the company is going to die or is going to make it. And I'm just curious if you can share with us some of these crucible moments in the journey of Leanplum, like, these moments where you're faced with like a really make or break situation for the company, where you need to make a very tough choice, a choice that it's hard to reverse. If you could share with us a couple of examples, would be great.
Yeah, I completely agree. It feels like a roller coaster more than anything. And I actually often say when I speak with people who want to work for us that, startups are not for everybody, because if you want to have a cushy, kind of stable, predictable future, it's where the big companies are. And however, that was a little bit boring for me, to be honest. And I needed to be able to first be in control, and secondly, be part of that up and down journey, because it just makes me feel alive. And sometimes it's too much, I will say. But one example, I remember it was just literally right after Techstars, and our goal was to raise a seed round of funding. And goal, I think we had like just under $1 million of funding that we wanted to raise, and off we go, right? And we raised half of it, and then we got stuck. We did a very successful angel list campaign where we were the top trending startup for a week on the mailing list. So we got like a lot of investors from random places around the world who wanted to invest, but that filled up half of it, 500K. And then our program, by the way, demo day was on November 1st. So about a month in, I basically have half of it. And then I'm starting to email people. It's already Thanksgiving, and then December come about, and literally for like 40 days, all I'm doing is just emailing people, and everybody's like, we'll take a look, and nobody's responding. So, at that point, I thought I'm gonna fail, right? Because my job is to raise the funding, and I just couldn't do it. And I was just trying, and nothing was working. And one of those breakthrough moments was I got again to this particular party. It was actually the president of Bulgaria at the time was a very kind of tech savvy president, and he came in and did a tour of Silicon Valley as part of his campaign, and he went and visited Google, a bunch of other places, and then he invited entrepreneurs and other people from the valley over to for Christmas Eve, right? And it's just a party at his residence. So that was a very special thing, and I just went there. And again, Momchil, in the spirit of chatting up everybody, so I went and met everybody. And sure enough, I met this guy, Luben, who turned out to be kind of like, he started the equivalent of the yahoo.com for Bulgaria. In the .com, it was basically a big property. And Bogomil is a longtime friend with him. And he invited me over to his office on Christmas Day. And I pitched him, and he basically committed to put in a small amount. Then later that day, he said, okay, I'll put in more. Then after that, he invited his other friends to put in more. Then he introduced me to Bogomil. Then he introduced me to a bunch of other people. And then January came about, and all these emails I had been sending started to come back. And essentially by January 5th, I had filled out my entire round. But it was just so weird, because I later realized that basically November, kind of Thanksgiving through end of December, is pretty much a dead month in VC world, and nobody really wants to invest. Probably people do, but it's just really, really hard to do. And but again, it was a numbers game. I had a sheet of 160 investors that I had to talk to, and I went and talked to every single one of them, and 20 of them invested, and that's how I filled out my round. But a little bit of luck, and a lot of hustle, and a lot of trying hard, not giving up, because I could have given up many times, but it just I wanted to just keep going.
Awesome. Now, as the company grows, people's roles change and evolve, and you actually have had a number of roles at the company. You were a CEO until a couple of years ago, and you decided to give it up and become the chief product officer. And very recently, Michal Hashimoto, the founder of HashiCorp, did a very extreme thing where he decided not to be a CEO years ago, but now he decided not to be on the executive staff at all and go back to being a rank and file engineer. And what prompted you to change your role at the company, and how do you think about, as a founder, putting yourself in the right role for every given stage of the company journey?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and frankly, I think part of it is just learning about your strengths, areas of improvement, and just being able to apply yourself where the company is going to need you the most, and part of it is where the company is at in terms of stage. I remember one of my favorite entrepreneurs, actually, his name is Vasil Terziev. He's a Bulgarian, also an angel investor in Leanplum, and him and I were discussing kind of the life cycle of companies, and he said how companies tend to have 4 distinct phases of growth. The first phase is the founding phase, where it's basically the moment of inception, where 2 founders come around and they come up with an idea, and then they put it to you and turn it into a company. And that phase is by far the hardest, because it's the most impossible one. It's not a predictable phase. It's either 1 or 0, right? There's no in between. And that's, I'm really great. I enjoyed that part. It was a ton of work. It was a tremendous sprint, but that's where really founders, come in, and their skill set of being adaptable, being, hustlers, being able to not give up in the hard moments, just having that kind of inspiration comes into play. Then the next phase is where essentially going through the growth, the first few, maybe a couple years of growth, and you get to, especially in SaaS, I would say about $1 million of ARR, 1 to 2 million of ARR. And that's important, because once you get to 1 to 2 million of recurring revenue in SaaS, it just means that you're no longer just asking your friends and family to buy your product. You actually have a product, and there's early signs of product market fit, right? And that's exciting. And that's a tremendous amount of work. I mean, all the things I mentioned, right? Nobody wants to be a first customer. Nobody wants to come in and do marketing with you and co-marketing and whatnot. And the first employees are really hard to get. So that's that part. Then the next part, I would say, is where, and again, you have to be super adaptable as a founder. You have to find ways to pivot the business, find essentially where the product market fit lives, right? Then the next phase, I would say, is where between 1 and 10, you're starting to get initial traction. And so the initial traction is where now whatever worked at 1 needs to work at 10. And the problem is you don't have resources to operate at 10. You just have resources to operate maybe at 2. And so it's just extremely grinding to go through that phase. You literally have to carry the company through that phase. And it's just really long hours. It's, again, not for everybody. And then where things start to get interesting is once you get past 10 million and you're on your journey to 100, that's where I think initial scale starts to hit in. And scaling things from 10 to 100 it's more about creating repeatability, right? Being able to create a playbook for people so that you can scale with an organization of salespeople and CS organization and on. And you have to put in all the processes in place together, and you have to manage people. And at that phase, what I noticed is that a lot of times I was actually interacting and doing more of the kind of project management and managing execution and setting OKRs, setting goals, hiring, basically, driving accountability. That was the primary job, the operational job, and the job which I was really enjoying in the earlier days, which was being with the product team, sitting with the product team, being in front of the customers all the time. That kind of was put behind a little bit for me, and I to be honest, that's really where my strength is as well, and not necessarily of the more operational scaling phase. And there's also people who are on the opposite side, where they're really exceptional, operationally skilled, which is the case with our new CEO. who's more of a professional CEO, I would say. Long story short, I would say what I found is a way for me to focus on what I'm really good at and what I enjoy most, which is the product and being in front of customers. And I get to leave the other stuff, which is the stuff that's really the hard stuff of scaling the company, to somebody else. And if you're curious, the last phase of that growth journey, according to our my mentor, is 100+ million, and that's where it's all about being risk averse, because you've now built a really big sustainable business, and you just want to make sure that you don't mess it up. So you have to make small steps. You have to be very careful, and that's a whole different beast. I mean, we haven't gone there, so it's a different part of the story. But we're kind of in that phase of growth between 10 to 100, and that's that's kind of where I thought would be a good place for me to focus on that role and bring in somebody else to be able to complement me.
Awesome. Switching gears a little bit, I want to ask you some more personal questions about life as a startup CEO. Being a founder, you're always expected to be at peak performance. Like you can't really let your hair down, so to speak, and that's tough. So I'm curious, what are some personal routines or habits that you have established or adhere to that have allowed you to operate effectively in that long marathon?
Yeah. I actually remember one of the first few days when we entered the program in Techstars, our mentor, our managing director of the program, he basically said, the most important thing is you guys are going to be working pretty much the whole time, 16 hours, but make sure you sleep 8 hours. And then there's one more thing for you to do, which is go to the gym every morning, right? And he was just saying, look, it's going to be tremendously taxing for you. Exhaustion, burnout, constant fear of failing. And you need to essentially make sure that you have a healthy body, right? Otherwise, you're not going to be able to keep up with it. And I kind of stuck with it. And up until, I would say, before COVID, I was pretty much like every single day, I work out 30 minutes in the morning. I do a cardio exercise. And it's one of those things where if I don't do it, like I almost feel like I can't really, I mean, it kind of affects my mentality. I know there's endorphins released when you run and when you do cardio, but the way it works for me is it just makes me feel a little bit more calm. And there's always going to be that roller coaster ride, and fear of failure continues, right? And there's constantly things and huge challenges going on, but at least I feel like, okay, things are under control, I'll figure it out. Versus if I don't exercise, I'm just, okay, panicking and what do I do? And just not really top peak performance, So that's my little trick. I actually noticed, the other thing I noticed is that when I'm doing public speaking, if I don't exercise, I tend to, again, be very fearful of how I'm going to do in front of people. So
you must have gone for a long run this morning.
I did go for a long run. But yeah, I mean, I think it just really affects kind of how I feel. So that's probably my little trick is I exercise, and it makes me, keep up.
Starting a company is possibly the hardest thing that anybody can put themselves through professionally. And so despite all the stress and challenges that come with it, what makes it worth the while for you being an entrepreneur?
Yeah. Actually, I very distinctly remember when I was starting the company, I wasn't sure if I should start the company because, as I mentioned, I had a cushy job. I had a lot of equity at Google, and it didn't make sense financially. Like the expected value of starting a company just wasn't, there. And I actually have a spreadsheet. Of course, I'm an engineer, so I had a spreadsheet with pros and cons of starting a company.
And did the spreadsheet have an answer? Expected value of staying at Google, expected value of like starting a company,
something like that. And it balanced out more or less. I mean, I had a lot of pros and cons. And then what swayed me was I read this thing about how essentially life is pretty much a collection of all the hard choices you make in your life. And if you go through with your life and imagine I wanted to just imagine myself like, maybe I'm in my 60s or 70s and I have grandkids, one of those days, hopefully. If I'm telling my life story, I could tell my life story where all the hard choices I made are the interesting pieces of that story that I'll be able to tell. versus an alternative story where I tell the story about how I got into Google when I was 23 and I stayed through and I just worked my job, right? And it just felt like the most boring story possible that I could have said. And that made me feel, okay, well, I just want to give that a try because all those great jobs that are out there, they're always going to be there. There's always going to be demand for engineers and for product people. I guarantee you that. But I felt like now's the time to just, give this a try and actually make a hard choice. And that's what happened.
Awesome. And I assume that most people joining us today are either founders themselves or aspiring founders. And what words of wisdom might you have for somebody who is thinking about starting a company today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's you have to be mentally prepared. When you start a company, it's a long journey. Like a lot of people come in and think, okay, this is going to be a quick one. We'll just go and do a couple of years and maybe get acquired or do something else. And that's just not how it works. I think the average lifespan of a startup is 7 years, if I remember, for having an outcome. And you have to go into it knowing that you're really going in for like 7+ years, right? That's one thing. The other thing is it's going to be a lot of work, and it's, very taxing. I remember, okay, well, in the early days, we did 90 days straight of 16-hour days. And then after that, we said, we're going to pull back. We're going to take Sunday off. We're going to do 12 hours a day, 6 days a week for, over a year. And then after that, we kind of slowed down a little bit more, but it was just a lot of work, tremendous amount of work. And and I would say, have that mental kind of mindset, but at the same time, I do think at the end of the day, there's really no downside of quitting your job and actually starting a company. If you have the ability to do it, it's not like all the jobs are going to disappear. In some cases, some people would actually offer you to come back and keep your equity package at a big company because they really want you back. So it's not like you're going to lose everything and then you're jumping into the unknown. I mean, the out there is still going to be available for you. So my recommendation is, if you have that mindset and if you're ready to put in the hard work and you really enjoy it, like just really there's no downside of doing it. So I think that's kind of my parting or kind of wisdom words, or how we want to say it. I think it's definitely worth it to give it a try.
Awesome. Let's take a look at some of the questions in Slido. I think we answered a couple of them, but let's just go from the top. So the most upvoted question is, how important do you think location is today for a startup? Do we need to be in Silicon Valley or New York City to get attention of VCs, e.g. Sequoia? And you give your answer, and then I'm happy to give my perspective as well.
Yeah, I will say you're probably the best person to answer this, because when I started, we actually made the specific move from Seattle to San Francisco because of location, because we were from the Bay Area, all of our contacts were in the Bay Area, and we wanted to essentially go back. We wanted to hire some of our ex-coworkers from Google, which we ended up doing. We wanted to build our network here in San Francisco, and that's what we did. And I think all of this has kind of gone upside down with COVID. So now everything is digital and people are moving everywhere. So I'm really curious to hear from you, actually, Bogomil. What do you see? How has this changed in terms of the importance of being in the Valley?
So I'm part of the early stage team, and I mostly work with seed and Series A companies. And of the 8 companies that I'm on the board, not a single one is working in an office right now. And I think literally all of them have given up offices. Only one intends to rent an office again and be in an office. And there are a couple of companies that have hired WeWork spaces where if people want to meet in person, like ad hoc, to go and have a in-person meeting, they can do that. But so I think kind of almost the default for a new company is like fully distributed. I think it used to be the case, I'm told, years ago, when VCs would say that they'll only invest in companies that are a bike ride away from Sand Hill Road, and then it was like a 30-minute drive. And nowadays, honestly, it really doesn't matter where you are. it's interesting, one of the companies where I'm on the board, we invested in them after COVID. I had actually never met the founders in person until last Friday. So this is like a year and a half of working with these people completely on Zoom. Put a gun to my head, I couldn't tell you where they live. And like literally, like I couldn't tell you where the founders are located. And only last Friday, I learned that 2 of them are in the LA area and the third one is in North Carolina. I honestly didn't know that. And I think that's pretty much your answer. Because again, I don't know what the world would look like next year or a couple of years from now, but for now, even if you're in the Bay Area, you're not going to have in-person interactions with most VCs. Like your meetings are going to be on Zoom anyway. So you might be in Hawaii, you might be in Iceland, like you might be whatever you want to be, and like nobody knows. And at Sequoia, we have proactively started tracking like the geography of the companies that we meet, because again, we have a sense that we see a lot more geographical diversity than ever before. And that's a good thing. Like, we don't think it's a bad thing.
And Eli, Micah.
The next most popular question is, would you mind sharing a bit about the problem validation phase for Leanplum? How did you discover your early adopters? So problem validation and how do you discover your early adopters? I think we partially addressed the early adopters part, but maybe talk about how do you do problem validation? How do you convince yourself that there is a market for the thing that you are building?
Yeah, it's, so basically that story that I mentioned. So I highly recommend conferences. Unfortunately, nowadays with COVID, conferences are less effective, but conferences are a great way to basically get all of your potential customers in one swoop, and just in 3 days set up so many meetings that would literally take you a year to be able to set up, right? So that was basically our kind of.
And it allows you to talk to strangers who would probably give you a less filtered perspective. The challenge with talking only to people in your network is that people are going to be nice to you and you're going to get a lot of false positives for your idea.
Oh yeah, I mean, when I was walking up to people, they're on their phones, and they would look at me and they're like, "Why are you even like bothering to talk to me? I'm on my phone, right? I don't care. I go and talk to them anyway." So I think one thing we learned at Techstars, which was really helpful for me, was we got this book called 4 Steps to the Epiphany, and it's one of my favorite books. It's from Steve Blank. He was kind of in a way, the godfather of the lean startup movement and customer development as a process, and there they talk quite a bit about this notion of essentially customer discovery and customer development, right? In product, obviously, engineers like myself, we're really good at product development, but customer development is equally important, and that's really the question here is about that. And one tool that we got into Techstars, in addition to that book, was the Lean Canvas, which I use actually to this day with our product managers. And the idea of it is really product market fit is kind of a two-sided thing, where on one side you have a persona and you have a potential customer in their job. They're doing their job, and in their job they have pains and have gains, and they have essentially the must-have pains. Really, your goal is going to be to ask specific questions that discover what those must-have pains and gains look like, versus the ones that are nice-to-haves, right? What are the vitamins versus the antibiotics? And then on the other side of that canvas is the pain relievers and the gain creators. So the pain relievers, those are really the ways you address the biggest pains that are unmet right now in that market or for that persona. And ultimately, your product is there. That's the last piece to it, is how you actually implement it. What are the features and functions and essentially all the things you need to build to address that, really. And so I think really my job when we started the company, 2 co-founders, right? My co-founder, Andrew's brilliant engineer. He was able to write code at like 10x speed that I could possibly imagine. And I basically immediately took over the job of the customer development side, right? So he's product development, I'm customer development. And I was the one that initiated a lot of the calls and the customer discovery, and that ability to ask the right questions to be able to really assess what are the top pains and gains for those customers. I think that's really the framework that I used. And and it's been really helpful for me, right? I've been able to, especially when you do it at a conference where you end up on the third day with literally, we had like a clipboard with, I don't know, like 100 printed pages of all the 10 questions that I wanted to ask from the book. And I asked every single person all the questions, and I went back and I looked them side by side, and then you can immediately see the pattern, right? You can immediately see, okay, engineers don't care about this, product managers do. Okay, why do they care about it? What is their North Star metric they care about? What are the biggest pain points? Okay, pain point is they don't want to be constantly bugging the engineers to do all the A/B testing they need to be doing. Okay, great. So there's this conflict there, right? And so, okay, what is the, how do we address this pain point? And it's on and on and on, right? What are the various features that we can build to address it, right? So that was really the process in a little bit more detail. I think somebody's asking again the name of the book. It's called 4 Steps to the Epiphany. I'll write it up. It's a great book. It's one of my favorite books.
And while you're doing that, one of the most popular questions is about your pricing model. How do you define your pricing model, and has it changed over time?
It has changed, actually. One of the things that we did early on when we started was we just put up Stripe integration, and we wanted to get the basically just start our product for whatever, $79, $399 a month. Everybody was doing that in the SaaS world, so we just said, why not? And then we hired a VP of sales who was more of an enterprise background, and he was a very different kind of motion. So more of a top-down sale, larger deals, working with larger clients, and completely changed how we were essentially doing things, right? And so our ACV today would be in the 5 figures, right? We have deals that are $1 million. Some of them are hundreds of thousands of dollars. A lot of them are in the 5 figures. But we ended up essentially changing our model. We ended up shutting down the self-service model and switched to more of an enterprise motion. And so that involves a completely different way of building the business. And I actually spoke with one of the founders of Heroku, and one of my favorite things he said was essentially a company, there's 2 types of companies, obviously the bottom-up companies, the top-down companies in terms of SaaS. And a lot of companies basically end up launching a product in the market. They end up doing a self-service model, and maybe they spend 18 months building that product. And then the next 18 months, they want to do an enterprise because that's how they get the big bucks. They get really large companies to use them. They spend the next 18 months building an enterprise product, and then they spend the next 18 months trying to figure out how to combine the 2 products because they end up being completely different. Not completely, but I would say very different. The composition of your company changes from very marketing and growth heavy to more enterprise sales heavy. The product features obviously change. So anyway, it was just the way things worked for us. We ended up going that enterprise path. I'm sure a completely different path could have been for us to continue on that self-service model and bottom-up selling, but that's just not how it happened for us. And yeah.
But sounds like one of the most important things about figuring out the pricing model is first having clarity on what your sales model is like.
Yeah.
And what your cost of sale is, and like, is it bottom up, is it doubles down, and so that's one of the key inputs in figuring out your pricing model. Yep. Another popular question: what are some of the good milestones in an early stage SaaS startup?
Yeah, I would say I remember we celebrated $1 million a lot. We it was a really huge milestone for us. Yeah,
$1 million ARR, I assume.
ARR, right? Recurring revenue, essentially $1 million of recurring revenue. Yeah, I think we probably celebrated every time we tripled. We celebrated quite a bit, and yeah, we got encouraged by the board to celebrate because those are really important milestones, like hitting, Also, I think the employee sizes, like getting to 100 employees, is really memorable for me. Yeah, it felt like every time you doubled the number of employees, it felt like a different company, frankly. It almost very different, things you do in the company, even little things like our little rituals that we did on Friday. Every Friday we had actually every Thursday we had a whiskey Thursday, and we just got around with a shot of whiskey. One of those things you can't do on Zoom. Or maybe you can, actually, why not? You can do it in front of the camera as well. And everybody shared their high and low of the week. Again, in the spirit of startups are a roller coaster. So, let's just all share and be able to know what's on your mind, right? What's keeping you up at night and what are you happy about? And this ritual, once we got to 20 or 30 people, it just broke down because it's, takes an hour for everybody to go and share. So we kind of lost a really important piece of our culture. So you have to completely change the culture in a way. But anyway, I think that's why I remember, for example, when we were 10 people and then we were 20 people and then we hired a bunch of people and all of a sudden we're 40. And when I go in and speak on our morning stand-up, it felt like I'm doing a public speech and in front of 40 people. So yeah, I mean, all those kind of milestones are really important, I think, and feel very differently.
Got it. Just going
Bogomil,
down
I know you have a hard stop at 6 p.m. and I actually wanted to ask you one question. I'm sure a lot of people would be interested. What are you looking for in a founder when you're investing? You've said that you've now invested in 8 companies. How do you find good companies to invest?
Well, so I think the formula for good companies is fairly straightforward to articulate and very difficult to execute. The formula is as simple as we look for big markets and great founders, right? But now what makes a good market and a great founder is far more complicated. To your question about what we look for in founders, first and foremost, we're looking for a spike that means a unique ability, like a special power. And that could be like one of many things. Maybe you're a 10x engineer. Maybe you're like Andrew, who can write code like 10x like faster than somebody. Maybe you have an amazing charisma and you can be a great salesperson and a great advocate for the company, and you'll attract talent by your sheer charisma, and maybe you'll convince customers because of your sheer salesmanship and charisma. It could be that you have very deep insight about human nature or a particular market, or maybe you are a very deep domain expert in something. It could be completely arcane, or it could be like a big market, but we always look for that uniqueness that we can hang our hat on, so to speak, and we call it a spike, but it really is the defining characteristic of that founder. Why are they the right person, to start that particular company? And so apart from the spike, we look for some common characteristics across all founders, which are along the lines of are they structured and clear thinkers? Are they articulate? Because again, as a founder of a company, you need to be selling the company all day, every day, to prospective employees, to customers, to the press, to everybody. We look for grit and perseverance because yes, the highs are high, but the lows are low, and you need to be able to, when you stumble, you need to be able to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and keep on going. I would say those are the primary characteristics that we look for in a founder.
Awesome. Thank you, Bogomil, and back to you, Tiffany. I think we're just about ready to wrap.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for your time, Bogomil and Momchil. I believe the audience, including me, really enjoyed the fireside chat. So again, it's a pleasure to have you both. And that said, I posted the post-event survey in the Zoom chat, and feel free, please do fill it out. So we'd love to hear your feedback. And so then we'll wrap up the event, and all of you have a great night. And again, thank you, Bogomil and Momchil.
Great to be here.
Good. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.